Welcome to Through the Noise. I'm your host, Ernesto Glucksman. One of the things I've been learning about renewable energy production is intermittency is kind of a pain in the ass problem to deal with. The sun's not always out, the wind's not always blowing, but when the sun is out and the wind is blowing, sometimes those energy producers that are paying you for that energy can't actually take the energy you're generating. Things called curtailment. There's only a certain amount of energy they can actually put into the grid before things start to get a little too hot to deal with. And so much of the energy that sometimes is generated by some of these installations on the renewable side goes nowhere. It's not used. So my next guest has a solution. He has an approach. It's a little bit unique, but it's real and it involves crypto. Kind of strange, but it's awesome. I had a great conversation with him, and he's definitely onto something in terms of scaling and helping more renewable energy sources come online with the grid. Our next guest is John Belizaire from Soluna Computing. Okay, John, thank you. Thank you for swinging by. I've been wanting to talk to you. I'm really intrigued about the thing that you do. And I would say it's not the most common thing for somebody to come across as a concept in this transformation, this transitioning to more of an electrified world that we're going towards, but it's definitely compelling. So I know, John, that like you get invited to dinners and there's somebody like offhand, they don't know anything about what you do. Where do you start when they ask you like, John, so what do you do?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show first, Ernesto. It's exciting to be here. And you're right. What we're doing is hard to explain sometimes. And luckily, now that things are opening up with COVID, I'm having more dinner conversations and meeting people at parties, and they do invariably ask me, so what do you do? That's the scary question I always get. In my prior life, I was so embarrassed. Like I used to say I was I ran an insurance software company, and people were like, "Ho hum!" Like, why is that so exciting?
They turn to you.
I tried my best to
what
make
do
it
you
exciting to say what we do, and people are like, "What do you do?" And they turn to the next person. Now I say, I run this company that's helping to make renewable energy the world superpower, and they're like, "Wow, that sounds cool. Tell me more." And I say, "Well, what most people don't know is that renewable energy plants, when they're built and they connect to the grid wasn't designed to have lots of renewable energy on it. It's actually more of a synchronous system, matching that generation to demand." Mm-hmm. And most people don't know this, but about a third or up to a third of the power that those plants generate never actually makes it to the grid, doesn't see the light of day, and causes all sorts of financial issues for those plants. And they're like, "Wow, I didn't know that." And then I say, "Well, what do you do about that?" And I said, "Well, we build these data centers, actually, these modular data centers that sit right at the power plant, that absorbs that wasted energy and converts it into clean, green computing for AI, crypto mining, machine learning, and a host of different batchable processes, anything that's sort of pausable." And they're like, "That's fascinating." They don't turn to the other person. They're like, "Tell me more." And they're like, "Well, I didn't know that." And so it's pretty exciting to be running a company that's super exciting. Not to, for my friends in the insurance world, I still love you and everything, but it was hard to explain.
Wasn't as sexy, I guess.
Exciting. But here, everybody, the average person really is excited about renewable energy. Obviously, with Russia and everything, people's imaginations have now opened up to the concept of, can we transition from fossil fuels faster? So anything that's helping to make that happen, which is what we're doing, is interesting and exciting for people. So that's what we do. We build these green data centers that convert wasted, or in the industry, it's called curtailed energy, to a global
nicer sounding version of it.
Exactly. More technical. And so we convert it to this global computing resource. And we like to say the computing data centers that we build are kind of like batteries, right? So they're taking that energy and converting it into a form that can then be used by this global population that's interested in this new form. And to some extent, we're storing the energy, converting it, and then transporting it in a way that is transportable, right? In the past, there were solutions to this problem that were not batteries or transmission, right? You'd build a aluminum smelt plant, believe it or not. So one of our Soluna podcasts has an episode where we talk about that, where you build this aluminum smelting plant, and then you basically take that raw material aluminum and sell it into the global, aluminum marketplace, right? So depending on the price of aluminum and the price of electricity, you can do a trade on that. But that's really hard. First of all, people don't go in for that right now, like building an aluminum smelting facility near their community. Number two, aluminum, the price of aluminum, well, up until COVID, right, was sort of this global resource. China had really dominated it, and it sort of decimated these facilities. But it wasn't a very easy thing to transport that stored energy in that form.
It's a product. It's like
a physical raw material. You got to put it on trucks now. You got to put it on a
warehouse,
put it on a boat.
Right.
Right. Here,
transport it.
We're doing something similar, but we're converting it into a digital form. And in that digital form, that is globally accessible. And we're doing computing that can be done anywhere in the world, right? And it can be accessed anywhere in the world. That creates a global resource that is instantly transportable. And so, boom, like that, we've created a completely different approach to solving a really big problem for the renewable energy industry and getting renewables to a point where it's the dominant power source. This is going to be probably the biggest challenge that we solve over the next few years to make renewables ubiquitous. How do you deal with the challenges where lots of renewables show up on a part of the grid, creates so much congestion that the power plants can't get their power on the grid and move that power? So there's lots of things we're going to do. We're one of many solutions that will be used to address that. But we're a novel approach, right? Computing is ready now. Computing is scalable. Computing is growing at a pace that we can't, most people don't really imagine. I mean, people are walking around with devices in their pockets that are generating and collecting data on them continuously, and that needs to be processed and computed upon. And so what we're doing is saying, take that momentum and turn it into a powerful solution for the renewable energy's biggest problem. That's what we're doing.
Okay.
So that's a long conversation I'm having with the person next to me. We're probably glasses of wine.
We're going to order the next round.
But they're sticking with me. They're hanging with me, that's cool.
Hold on. Let me break into a little bit on the problem part of it, right? Because that part is probably not understood very well. So let's say I'm a farmer and I got a couple of solar panels put out on my field, or no, I got a couple of turbines.
Right.
The wind comes and goes. There's some intermittency, right?
Yes.
Why is there more, and why would I experience more energy that I have to then figure out whether I need a like aluminum smelting pot or your solution?
Good question. So the way to understand that is to go back to the original design of the grid. There's a really fantastic book called The Grid, and I'll forget
on my list.
Gretchen.
Yes.
I'm forgetting her last name now. Fantastic. It takes you through the whole history of the grid, why it was created, why we have the difference between, generation, transmission, distribution, how it was completely, decentralized, if you will, to use a apropos current phrase. What most people don't know is that the original design for the grid, back to like Edison, right? So Edison would sell you basically electricity kits. It had a generator, all the lines, power, and the lights. So, and that's because people had generators integrated into their homes. Okay. And fast forward a few years, you have this brilliant engineer who actually came out of Edison, moved to Chicago, I believe. He forms an energy company. It's not called Edison Energy, but it's close. And he basically figures out, if you go out and figure out all of the energy needs of the houses and homes in that particular area that he's going to service, then he can build a power plant exactly sized to that demand and then service all of those houses. So you no longer have to have a power plant in your home in the basement, burning wood or whatever it is.
And you having to measure how much wood and things you're going to burn to keep the lights on and the machine at your factory or whatever.
Correct.
That's all done centralized remotely by roughly calculating. And you have that's the thing with electricity. You have to match the amount of demand with the amount of energy you're putting into the grid.
Correct.
It has to balance out or get within a certain threshold. Otherwise, bad things happen. Things burn.
Really bad things happen.
Sparks happen. All kinds of things.
Forest fires, like lots of interesting things happen as a result.
But it's also interesting, like when you turn things on, there's like a spike just to get a machine running. There's a spike in the load. And then it's like the running load is lower than the actual starting load.
That's right.
And so it gets really complicated from that point on. So are these central points of generating energy? Are they generating a little bit more than the expected load for the day or the moment?
What happens is, so back to my example, so this gentleman designed, a coal-fired plant. He can ramp it up and he can dispatch it. That's the technical term. That means power, bring the power online to support all of these households. He can tune it down depending on what's happening with folks because they went to work or whatever. They don't need as much power. Mm-hmm. So, fast forward, you basically grow to a grid where it's completely national, completely distributed. The power lines don't just, focused on Chicago, but they cross state lines and so forth, right? And you have the power plants no longer owned by the utility itself. It's actually owned by private companies. They build power plants and so forth, right?
Right.
Now, if they're all 24/7 traditional fossil fuels, the grid still has the ability to fire them up because they know exactly how much power they're producing, and or scale them down, right? Because of that demand supply synchrony equation, right? Synchronization between demand and supply is the core component to the design of the grid. Now, all of a sudden, you wake up a few decades later and you say, we don't go in for these coal-fired things, putting CO2 into the atmosphere. We got to get rid of these things. So you start turning them off, and you're replacing them with these beautiful solar plants sitting on these expansive land, these fantastic turbines built with like beautiful wood and everything spinning, and the grid no longer has the ability to push a button and dispatch a generation facility. It's actually, the dispatching of it is actually powered by Mother Nature, right? So when wind is on, power is going to be generating. When the sun is shining, irradiation occurs. We convert that into electrons, and we're pumping those electrons into the grid, right? So
and that innovation is what gives panic attacks to energy. The more
grid
incumbent
operators,
guys,
they freak out because they're like, "Oh, I have all this power coming in now.
When I may or may not need it, but it's when the sun's out." Right.
Do I have a user for that power? Now, sophisticated grids actually have the ability to analyze that a day ahead. So tomorrow, I know how much power I'm going to need.
Based on the weather, based on
the weather, based on
models,
what's happening, in the market. And therefore, if your generation is going to be higher than what I need, you need to shut off, or you need to shut off part of your plant because I don't have any place for those electrons to go. That's what starts to happen. And to exacerbate that, what happens is when capital comes in, remember, these power plants are owned by private owners. So when they come in to, build these plants and find the ideal location for them, right? I call it the McDonald's and Burger King problem, right? Everybody is optimizing for where am I going to find the best place to build a power plant, and where am I going to find the best place for sun or the best place for wind, where they all end up in the same areas, right?
Generally.
And so you have several power plants being built in the same part of the country or in the same part of the grid that are vying for getting their electricity onto the grid. And so you have this congestion problem where lots of plants want to put electricity on. So then a lot of them end up either needing to spill their power, or they bid their power price so low, because it's a market-based system in a lot of these areas. They build their power so low that they will actually bid it to a negative price.
They'll pay you to take it just because I don't want to turn off the generator or deal with turning off my wind power because the wind's there's a hurricane or something, whatever it is.
Right. That's exactly right.
It's like this is whether it's a renewable power plant or the standard coal-fired stuff. It's they're dealing with the same problem of trying to figure out when and how to offload perhaps sometimes the energy that they're generating that they can't offload into the grid.
Exactly, into the grid.
Because everyone else is doing the same. Everyone else is generating and putting it into the grid. Yeah. And then, I call
it the McDonald's and Burger King problem because they're real estate companies and they're optimizing for location, all the way to the point where all their models basically point to the same location. And so you end up with a Burger King and a McDonald's across from each other. It's like the same idea, but in renewable energy, it's like that. So that creates this massive problem. And that happens all over the world. It's not unique to the United States. We're doing stuff here and in Europe, and we're seeing opportunities in Asia because renewable energy wants to be everywhere, which is, and the nice thing is it is everywhere, right? But these investors, these folks who own these power plants are starting to suffer because there's so much capital coming in. There's more power plants being built. There are actually greenfield areas where you could build a plant, but investment is not going there because you can model this. Now, I talked about the fact that there's data and there's computing. You can model based on, energy prices, information. You can tell if you build a plant there, you're going to have this problem right away, right? But if you don't have a solution, why build the plant? Why take the risk? So now folks are talking to us and saying, hey, if I build a plant in this location, can you tell me how much of my curtailment you can consume if you build a facility there?
Oh, you're just solving a big issue with location then for them suddenly. Exactly. You can put a wind turbine renewable energy source in some remote area and put your data centers next to them, and you otherwise absorb over
that you otherwise wouldn't have, but now you can because
you have a way to get some value out of it from it.
Exactly.
That's not just paying the next guy down the line to take your extra electrons.
It's like a physical in the industry we call like a physical hedge, right? Where if I know I'm going to have spilled power, or that increases, my data center is flexible, so we can take more or less of it as you have it available. And so that's what makes our solution very.
And I presume this means you could put these in very remote areas too, where you don't have to calculate where's the main line to a main grid.
Right.
You can just put it there in an intermittent area, maybe buy the turbine that's more than the village or wherever it is you're trying to generate, and know that if it generates more power because the wind is really howling, you have a way to sell that energy into this data center.
Exactly. Ernesto, the
holy shit,
what we're doing has broad implications for the energy transition and renewable energy in general. What excites me is what this could do for parts of the world where people suffer from energy poverty, right? Because no one's excited about going to build a power plant where they live. So if you can integrate power plants and computing in this way, you can build power and energy in places where it's more challenging to do so because you've got this embedded monetization capability. And that could open up those economies to growth, right? You need energy to grow an economy. There's sort of like this chicken and egg, right? You need energy to do that. You look at any developed country, as they grew and their economy grew, their energy consumption spiked up significantly. And so if they didn't have a reliable way to power that growth, it would be very difficult for them to grow. And that happens today in some African countries because they can't entice investors. They don't have the ability to, finance these projects But if they came in with their own embedded capability to do so, you can build a power plant, let's say, that does 100 megawatts. You put 50 on it on the grid, 50, behind the meter powering a data center. And as the market grows, right, you can shift more of that to the actual grid versus the facility. So that's the beauty of this model.
You can also imagine, I mean, there's there's some, I think everyone, when you just superficially think about, well, we need more renewable energy, right? Okay, so just put more of it, right? And then, but you see examples across this country, you see examples of where there's a backlash from the incumbent energy producers going like, we can't, we're optimized for the area with the energy and the old coal fire, whatever it is, or natural gas power plants that we have. Adding renewables then adds this extra variability that we're not going to know what to do with our curtailment energy, right? I mean, they want to invest in it, or they want to open up the local grid for microgrids, is my understanding. I don't really understand entirely what this world's going on, but I get this sense that they don't know what to do with it. Therefore, they ask for regulators not to allow too much of it, right? Which is counterproductive to what we need. We need more of it, not more renewable energy sources, not less.
That's right.
But we have to do something with the synchronization. They have to do something when you have too much demand. And this is solution. So let's talk about how the value gets created then at data centers. I have some ideas already, but because if I'm going to put a data center, this is the other, let me back up. Is it a challenge to explain to them sometimes, hey, let me just put this data center next to your solar farm or your wind power farm, because I can convert some of it? Do they kind of go, well, don't you need to have those computers running 24/7?
Yes. Right? We get lots of questions about our business model. How are we going to pay them? Wait, you're a data center. Don't you need like 24/7? We can't, we can't necessarily provide you 24/7, and we're saying, well, that's a great question. And actually, we've built the facility to be designed so it's not up 24/7. On average, we try to look for projects where we're up at least 85% of the time for each facility. But, we can be up higher, but we rarely get to a point where it's up 100% of the time. So what that means to us is two things. Number one, we have to have a business model that's resilient to that, right? So that's why we don't put e-commerce you're not going to see us put e-commerce applications in there, mission critical applications for customers. We put resilient applications or flexible applications in there. Crypto mining, for example, is a very flexible thing. You can mine, you can shut down, turn on, and mine again. You can AI and machine learning is also resilient. You can start working on a big data corpus, pause, wake up again, and start working on it. So we've designed a facility for specific applications. We've designed the facility itself such that it has this flexing capability, so it can be big or small depending on where the power source is. And then we do something that's unique to us, and that is to essentially look at all the facilities that we have and mesh them together.
There's your key. That's your rock.
So with the meshing technology, right, we're able to leverage compute resources that are not at that one location, but are more distributed among a series of locations, which allows us to deliver more computing capacity, even though one facility may be less available or down at the moment. See, by doing that, we achieve a higher level experience to accomplish that. Also, because we connect directly to the facility, we also get access to some grid energy as well. But that still doesn't mean we're going to be up 24/7, because the grid prices may be way too high for us if we're pulling from the grid, so we have to ramp back down. So that on average gives us that 85% or higher. But if you mesh a bunch of facilities together, you're now going to get up higher in the high 90s, let's say, still not 100%, but high enough to service these applications.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like all the I call it second tier computing stuff, right? Like caching, running backup, something that has to happen, but it doesn't have to happen right this second. It just has to happen, and within a certain period of time. And as clouds roll over across the United States, and you have enough of these spread
Exactly.
out.
Yes.
Some of them will take more of the load while the others shut down because there's no energy being generated or whatever it is, whatever the dynamics across the mesh network. You can manage that.
We manage that. Exactly. We can move the jobs around.
And then is your computing because of your service levels is a little bit cheaper than like more premium, always on, have to be next to a nuclear power plant, whatever.
That's right. Right. You got it. So now we can deliver that green electron-powered computing at a much lower cost. It's going to be lower availability, but you're willing to take on that lower availability for those applications. It might be a test application you're running. It's not mission critical to your company, but you eventually want it done. You want it done at a lower cost. And it's just that those applications are actually becoming more prevalent. They're bigger and just out there more. And so we think there's a very big market for this. And that's what we're focused on.
I mean, just like indexing, like Google's indexing processes, it doesn't have to index it's trying to index as much as it can, but it doesn't index every single time if you make a change to your website, right? It's like 100%. It'll run when Google decides to run it. That's right. And they're optimizing based on their resources, but it could be attached to some of this, right?
Yes. I mean, one of the things we've talked about, we haven't kicked this off, is to become sort of like part of those same networks, right? So if you're using Amazon, you might be using Soluna Computing as an Amazon customer. If you're using Google, there might be part of Soluna Computing powering that network because we've become just another resource for them as part of their environments. So that's one of the ways we've looked at distributing our computing capability on a grander scale, if you will, not just on our own, our own boots on the street, if you will.
I mean, that's the next level. I mean, do you envision like you would envision like an option in your Amazon AWS?
Yes.
Here's a little bit cheaper rate, but it means it's like 95 to 100%. It's a variable availability.
Exactly.
Computing, if you got patience, you don't need it right away.
Yep.
It'll be X number per however they calculate the compute.
Exactly.
How do they calculate compute these days on that?
It's typically sort of like whatever, computing cycles per hour or something like that, and a price per that. And they do have this concept of interruptible. So if you're running something and you're open to Amazon just like turning you off for a second and then putting another thing in there, you'll pay a lower price. It's still in their they're big, 24/7 facilities, and they can do that because there's windows where their enterprise customers are not using those computing resources right now. So they're continuing to monetize them to optimize the cost of capital and return for that building. But what we're saying is, imagine now you select that option. You want to have greener computing and you want to have less, or more intermittency in your computing, but you're willing to pay a lower price. And we're sort of like an outpost, if you will. And Amazon would put their equipment in our facilities, and customers would be able to use it. So we thought about those kind of ideas on how to scale and expand the footprint of our business. I
mean, you have to, right? These are
Amazon. If you're listening, call us.
I mean, the other thing, are you guys 100% attached to just putting your stuff next to renewable so that the mesh network is a renewable only energy source of computing? Like you can quantify that?
Yeah, our ethos is wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, basically anything that's sustainable. You won't tend to see us, except for sort of some of our early facilities that are completely on grid. You won't sort of see us next to a gas plant or nuclear is there's a question there. We debate, is that really renewable, but it's getting there. You won't see us refiring an old coal plant or something like that, which is still spilled energy, right?
Right.
But that's not the problem we're trying to solve.
Well,
our mission is to
okay, good. Renewables. So you're just trying to stick to the sort of the green market. You want real green computing. You can get it from here. You get it at affordable. And by the way, we have a solution for the providers to actually expand and not have to be next to that coal-fired plant, right?
Exactly. That's right. 100%. Yeah.
Man. Okay. So this thing has been around. You guys been working on this. Well, I looked at, you're a publicly traded company. You've been since 2018, roughly. So 4 or 5 years you've been at the helm helping.
Yeah.
You have like a co-CEO, just kind of one of those
Yeah,
modern day.
so it's a little confusing. We have a parent company. That's the company that's public, Soluna Holdings, and we're a subsidiary of that. We're the operating company, Soluna Computing, and so we focus on building the projects, operating them, managing them, finding them, developing the partnership relationships, and then eventually, selling the computing to ourselves and to customers, etc. And the holding company will eventually be sort of like the holding pen for all the things that we'll do in the future. But it's also the capital access point, So we have the ability to raise capital through the equity markets. So we sell pieces of our company to big institutions, infrastructure funds, very smart investors, let's say, and then that capital goes into our projects to build them. That can be expensive sometimes and very dilutive to our shareholders. The other way we raise capital is at the project level. So I build a project, Dorothy, let's say, or Kati. We name all our projects after famous, we call them badass catalyzer women scientists. And so Dorothy Vaughan in Texas, for example, has capital that's coming from us and our parent company. And it also has private capital, right, that would come in at the project level. And basically they invest in the project itself. The project generates cash flows and generates a return for them. And then they can then keep investing with us for more projects. So that allows us to scale our capital and decrease the cost of capital over time, because we're a very capital intensive business, to build lots and lots and lots of facilities, right?
I mean, the capital is, sometimes you got to put up a little roadway to something. You got to get the shelter. You got to bring in all the GPUs or computers.
All the equipment. We got to build buildings. We got to build electrical infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
You don't just come in with like a plug into the power plant.
No.
You got to build a whole electrical infrastructure that steps down the power, because these things are built to send high voltage, electricity to the grid. We have to step it down to, data center level.
The delicate nature of computing.
Exactly, of the equipment, right? And then we've got to build these very large, expansive facilities that, have these computers in them and have a very specific design to them, et cetera. And so that takes a lot of capital to do that. And that's what we do.
How, your pedigree is through the roof. You went to Cornell, you got computer science degrees, you got engineering degree, I think. You went to Wharton School of Business. I mean, it's like your brain is all about the business and the coding part of it, right?
Right.
Do you still code any of it now that you're the business, the big boss, or do you just rely on your team to get those systems on and running?
The only coding that I do right now is coding this robot that I bought my daughter for her birthday, and
gotta keep your skills sharp.
We work on it on the weekends, trying to get her into STEM and everything. So I am a computer scientist by training, yes, and so I understand software architecture and distributed computing and so forth, and so that's still up there in the noggin, a little dusty. But my real value as CEO is, building teams, setting a vision, keeping the company focused, raising capital, convincing capital providers to come in and support our business and growth, and building and managing relationships with our big power partners, over time. And that's the value I bring to the team. We have been able to attract some of the top software and hardware architects to our company. It's amazing how excited people are from outside the renewable energy industry, and they want to come in
to get into it.
Right, get into it, because they're like, we've solved hard problems in other places. Why can't we all jump into this space and help out?
I mean, I think, my career in this world of technology kind of seen like the web 2.0 was like an exciting period, I guess, but that's sort of a lot of Silicon Valley, a lot of like social media, new platforms, we're trying to be the next Pinterest or whatever. They, I think there's like a new, more mature opportunities that exist now in these like areas that people would think too much regulation or just too stodgy or just like there's not
Right.
enough excitement. But now
Yeah.
it's sort of changing that. So you are attracting talent
Yeah. I
into
mean,
your
we've
group.
got some amazing engineers that have reached out to us and like, how can we help? They're, folks coming from varied backgrounds in the software space, real, big iron enterprise.
Are we all Windows system here, or is it on Unix type
Yeah,
of
it's all
environment?
yeah, well, it's all multi-platform these days. Like everything's
Okay.
combinatorics, right? But it's cloud native in its design. We're using a host of different new exciting open source tools that we're using to build out the platform. And to some extent, we're building our own platform, right, to power different things, like bringing in data so we can analyze, like, should this facility be up right now or should it be down? Should it be,
Mm.
what jobs should we be running in this place, and developing a scheduling optimization system, if you will. And so it's just attracting really great talent that's excited about solving these really cool, gnarly problems, right? And want to work in a culture that has work in a company that has a real strong mission that they can connect with. And so we're really attracting smart, mission-driven people to join the team, and that's been really gratifying.
Can you give me a sense of like what's the unit footprint roughly? Like, let's say I have a couple of wind turbines. I mean, what are we looking at in
In
terms of,
terms of space,
yeah, like
yeah,
how much
good
land do I got to
question.
give up?
Yeah, good question. So with our facilities, if you have, give or take, about 3 or 4 acres, we can put 25 megawatts there,
Wow.
right? So, we
Okay.
really don't need a lot of space because we're not building these giant, you know, super city size facilities. We're actually taking smaller buildings and connecting them together in this Lego-like fashion to turn them into large facilities. See, so that gives us the ability to build things in remote areas very quickly, stand them up, and turn them into very large facilities. And so we tend to sort of ask for, on the order of tens of acres versus thousands of acres, right? For a very large facility.
So you're looking, it's like just like piece of slab and four
Yeah,
wall box that sticks
yeah,
up,
yeah,
and then you bring
yeah.
in the racks all
Yep.
the way to the ceiling,
Exactly.
and
And
you
they're
get them
specifically
running.
designed to be thermal efficient. Our power efficiency is probably one of the best in the world at this point, um, because we have designed the facility to efficiently convert electrons to computing. So we're air cooled in the facilities, things like that. So if you go to our website and go to projects, we provide views into each project every few quarters or so as they come online, and you see a completely different type of facility there. That's more distributed in its design. It's the relationship between the buildings when you look at them from above looks like a very conscious pattern, right? How we laid the buildings out. They're not just all in one giant row or not in a line. But we do that on purpose because it actually has certain proprietary properties from a thermal management perspective. And it's also beautiful to look at it from the sky, in a drone. So we do things like that to design a unique facility that's purpose built for this problem.
And you guys are sort of ramping things up, so
Yeah.
obviously, bigger opportunities are going to be more attractive to work on. But like, what's the smallest amount of energy a particular renewable energy provider would interest you to then have a conversation? I mean, the deal has to be made, but what's the sort of the smallest footprint? Because I'm seeing solar farms appear out of nowhere sometimes when you
Yeah.
drive through, where you're like, okay, that's new.
Right.
How much are they generating
Right.
there? I don't really know, but like,
Yeah.
what's sort of that's the smallest part, and then we can talk about the sweet spot, right?
Yeah. So, we could do it fairly small. Our smallest, like if we had a site where it just needed one building, let's say, that's 1.2 megawatts,
Okay.
right? So we could connect it in there, and if you get like a megawatt worth of power, we could do that. But that's just not efficient for us because of the amount of resources we've got to deploy and so forth. So if we had a partner that was building the facility and then, using our technology, we could do these smaller things. And I'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay.
Generally speaking, 25 megawatts is really sort of like our minimum. It's sort of getting to more like a 50 megawatt minimum at this point. And most projects we see need a 50 to 100 megawatt facility to absorb enough curtailment for it to matter to them. So on average, our projects are getting sort of to that size.
Okay, but hold on. Who's got the 50 megawatts? Is it like you guys consuming that amount, or like
that's us? So when I refer to megawatts or megawatt consumption, that's the energy consumption of the computing facility.
Okay. And so for somebody,
what I mean is there's enough of that energy available that's wasted for us to build a facility that big to solve the problem, which actually gives you some insight into how big the problem is.
Well, how big? So how big is a typical customer that's like, oh man, I could really use this at 50 megawatt?
Yeah. So you're talking about 200-300 megawatt facilities, right? Okay. They may be 2 to 3 times the size of our computing facility is the size of the power plant for us to put a facility that big next to it.
Okay.
But there are power plants out there that use, for example, the run of the river, for example. There's a concept called run of the river hydro, where they're smaller facilities, and they might have lots of them sort of trickled around the country. So one of the ways we look at doing projects is to basically put lots of smaller facilities around and then mesh those together, right? So it'd be below my minimum, but then I can do some of these smaller projects that might be harder for me to do because I've sort of combined them all together into one massive facility.
Oh, I see. Right.
It's with the same partner, like all the power plants are owned by the same partner. And then we say, well, let's do a deal that gives me 25 megawatts, but it's spread across, like one place is a couple megawatts, 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts here. Before you know it, you got 20, 30 megawatts. But it's addressing their problem in a much more expansive way. So that's a partnership. We look at those types of discussions too.
You're open to all of that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I bet a lot of these projects, it's just the permitting is
right. Exactly. Like the permitting, the cost. You've got to deploy
getting the inspector to show up.
Right,
like, okay, if there's somebody doing a big project, but they're in little spots down,
right. That's exactly right. And also keep in mind that, what's our motivation? Our motivation is to allow really big power plants to come online, because that's how you get to a much larger share of energy coming from green power plants. So we go for utility scale power plants as our primary focus, big infrastructure companies that own lots of plants around the world. So we focus there because you have to focus as a company, right? Because you want to execute well, you want to build expertise and then double down and perfect that expertise such that you can replicate it and scale it. So you want to make your projects look more and more the same, such that you can train, build people, build expertise that you can then distribute around the world.
Right. So if the projects become too bespoke, then you have
you're not building any muscle that's sort of repeatable, right? You have lots of people with different expertise and
fragmentation of systems or fragmentation of, right? And now you're in a cloud of difficulties, right? So the key is to sort of focus into a mid-market 100%. Position.
And that's true for just about, even like everything. When I was in the software side, right, we did the same thing. We'd say, let's just go after this one market and become really, really, really good at that. And so when people call us, they know we are the best at that, right?
At that spot.
So, exactly.
Ooh, but that's a tough one. And so I'm going to tap your brain on the CEO side of things. What if you're doing pretty well in this market and pretty well in that market, but you're not doing great in either one? You're losing bids here or there.
Right.
Well, it's a pretty painful process to then just simply go, well, we're going for this, right?
Right. Yeah,
How do you handle that decision point with your partners? How do you?
It's the number one skill that CEOs need to master. I mean, I believe it. So I write about it. Like I have a personal blog where I write about my learnings as CEO. being able to focus and teach your team how to focus is so important and hard at the same time. Trust me, I've been susceptible to new shiny objects. We want to grow. Let's just take that deal. And what I've learned when I look back is the places where I veered away from our focus, like, those were great opportunities. They got us some great cash, but it defocused the company and actually caused us to fail in the places where we were actually doing really well. So you actually got to do what you feel is, it's hard, because it's the opposite. Like, you got to double down on the things that you're good at and build expertise and build repeatable capabilities that form moats for your business, right? Become things that make it harder to get into your space. And so in your example, where you're in these different markets, but you're not deep and strong in many, you've got to kill one of those. And that's really hard, especially if it's keeping the lights on.
Or saying no to things.
Yeah, saying no to stuff. But one of the things that you have to master as CEO is to say no more often. No, we're not doing that. No, we're not doing that. And I do that today. And my team gets kind of annoyed. And I'm not saying I don't change my mind. Sometimes I do. If I think that there's a change in the marketplace where, hey, I think we should be saying yes to this because I think the market is shifting. You can't be, you can't focus, but so much that you sort of, lose your peripheral vision, to understand that things are changing around you. You've still got to be aware of that. But at the same time, it doesn't mean, wear just a giant, just have like a giant fishnet and just catch anything and eat anything that lands in that thing, right?
No, I mean, that's the thing. That'll you'll lose a lot of energy, thinking just the opportunity costs are hidden and all over that if you're too fragmented.
Yeah, that's right.
Into too many things.
Right. Yeah.
I always like, in the world that I've been in, it's, the whole full service communications agency. I never knew how they were really doing that full service stuff, because it's almost like they all do it. I'm in Washington, D.C. This is where all the full service communication agencies exist, right?
Yeah. Exactly. That's right.
Government affairs.
That's right.
And it's just difficult, and you can't stand out from the crowd in that regard too. Then it's like, it kills you on both ends, right?
Yeah. Whereas more like the, very focused agencies like crisis management, like that's all we do. We don't need to do crisis.
We don't mess with anything else. Got out of crisis.
You call us.
That narrows it down a bit. But even
that's all we do. That's the expertise. So we're really good at it. We got the bandwidth, and we can do a good job. But the other folks who have a crisis, like one crisis management person in there, because they're full service, can you really trust that they, they've seen it all? That's the difference. And that's how you build strong businesses that are very successful. And you diversify over time. You say, okay, like, we've become a really big player. How can we take those tools and expertise that we built in this area that we're really strong in to other markets? Where else can we take this talent and expertise to these other markets? By the way, that's why we're building our business in this phased approach. We're starting with crypto and then evolving to these other markets, because the same muscle and expertise we're building really large scale facilities, structuring with power plant owners, connecting to the green power, managing these facilities, building software to do it, is all applicable to these other markets, right? The only difference is going to have different equipment in the building. They're going to have different challenges in terms of customer acquisition and things like that, right? So, but the core expertise for managing and operating the facilities is the same, and so that allows us to set up right from the very beginning a bowling pin approach to, we're going to start with phase 1 to phase 2, and that's the approach we're taking.
Is crypto is it because of like all the bad press crypto has been receiving, that their, energy consumption needs are through the roof? And so do you see like there's a lot of crypto business organizations? I don't even know. That world is so crazy. But are they looking for places to get greener fast in their consumption and be able to say that they credibly do this, right?
Yeah.
They have a big enough problem. Right.
So the industry as a whole is moving toward more green energy, and some of the big players are going in that direction. Some of the players that primarily look for places to host their equipment are going, favoring places that are greener. We don't host, and so we build the facilities, we buy the equipment, put it in there, and mine the cryptocurrency for our own cash generation purposes that we then use to invest in more facilities. See, so for us, it's not about solving problems for the crypto industry.
That's not your customer base. You're just actually generating cash from it.
We generate cash because we're constantly investing in building the business. It's kind of like, if I use Amazon as an example, right? They recycle capital that comes from the e-commerce business into the data center business, right? Because the cash is essentially free for them. It's like really low cost of capital. We want to get to a size and scale such that we can do the same thing. Now, so as a result, we can plan everything because it's all about our own growth that we're planning for, right? So the capital comes in, invests, builds the equipment, we build the facilities, we operate them, we eventually replace the equipment, go after new markets, and then we just rinse and repeat that and keep scaling it across different enterprises.
Oh, you didn't have to wait for customers necessarily.
The less expensive.
You didn't have to wait for customers.
Exactly.
You're just using it on crypto. But if there is a customer that wants to
crypto, phase one is use crypto to bootstrap the whole green data center business because I don't have to look for customers. Exactly. So it gives me like 3 or 4 years to just build out these facilities. And when I go to customers, the last thing I want to be able to do, and this comes from my own experience as a CEO, is, hey, I'm this company and I want to take your processes and put them in my facility. And they're like, well, how many data centers do you have?
That was the question you're going to get.
I just have one.
No.
In Kentucky, want to hear I don't have like 1 megawatt in there. You know what I mean? I want to say I'm this company that has gigawatts of this stuff all over the world. And I have a connection to some of the biggest partners and renewable energy players in the world. And, massive amounts of capacity. And I now want to point that towards solving problems that you have.
And proven that you can manage the load across all this thing. Right. Now we have like real leverage in that negotiation.
Leverage and proof points that we can point to say, here's what we're doing. So that's why we've chosen this two-phase approach.
You have to, right? I mean, it's even like in products. You can't go to Walmart and be like, hey, I want to sell this book. And they got to know, they're going to ask you,
who are you?
How many of this do you have? Because if we put you on our shelf, we're going to need millions of it, right? Like, can you deliver? Exactly. Have you proven that? And that's what you're doing here effectively in the digital level.
Right. Exactly. Yep. So I go to Walmart and when I want to take on one of their processes, I've got to be able to take on a lot of it. And so, I want my brand, if we do this successfully, our brand will be associated with this sort of thing, right? And people will call us.
Wow, fascinating. I mean, just like a fascinating model. I just sort of pull this all together. What was your watershed moment where you thought, okay, this is something we can actually do? Like what you and your partners and like what were you?
It's a great question. It started during the pandemic, believe it or not.
Really?
My mom likes to say bad things happen usually for a reason, and usually that reason is a good reason. And in this case, we were suffering from an architectural design that we knew because the grid was expanding to the area, right? Our power plant was stranded. We were building a power plant, so we've been a developer ourselves, and that was clearly a environment where we were going to have this problem because the grid did actually make its way there. We were going to connect this off-grid power plant and computing facility to the grid, and suddenly we'd be selling power to the market, but then there'd be cases where we're not able to sell the power. What are we going to do with it? Well, we had an embedded solution to that problem, and that's when it kind of hit us in 2020 when we weren't able to travel back to Morocco because of the pandemic. We hungered down and did a whole strategy session and said, what do we want the future of our business to really be? Do we want to have to build the power plant every time? Can we actually solve a problem for existing power plants? And we spent 6 months, give or take, talking to some of the biggest owners of power plants in the world. And what we learned is not only will it be a solution to their problem, it's a big problem. And that's when we decided, let's break the company up into 2 companies. So Harmattan is now focused on building power plants, and Soluna Computing, which is part of Soluna Holdings now, focuses on building these green data center solutions for curtailment.
So you almost have like a possible customer slash partner with the power plant part of the business.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
power plant putting up a power plant. I mean, the sales cycle on that can be pretty long, depending on where.
Yes,
right?
Years. Yeah, we learned painfully. It takes years, especially when you're doing it like Northern Africa, where we were doing it in Morocco.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
Wow.
because it's a foreign country, and you've got to not only convince the local government, but you got to convince the federal government, and there's lots of things you got to do. You got to get special licenses. It takes years.
Oh man, just getting
and then
past
you got to
customs,
finance it, build it, operate
customs,
it.
logistics.
Yeah. You got to get stuff over there. Yeah. Whereas our computing facilities, but from the time we sign all the contracts, 6 months, we've got a facility that's humming next to that power plant and solving their problem. So that's the difference. It's a much more scalable enterprise where we can do a lot with it, and we can take down a lot of capital. We can, build lots of projects and really help the renewable energy industry accelerate. That's what's exciting to us, and that's why we're up every day. Like, let's go. What's the next thing to do?
Is the push right now just finding the suitable like renewable energy power plant operators that are interested and that have a little bit of space to build a facility next to them and get computing in there? You're not too focused on then how many customers can we get on the compute side just yet, because you're just building the network out.
Exactly.
And then in an aggregate, you might then go to somebody like an Amazon and be like, boom, here's a big old deal if you want to do this.
You got it. You got our playbook perfectly. Yep. That's what we're doing.
Oh my God, John, I think you're in an incredible spot because those are these microgrids, all the technology that's coming. I mean, do you hang out at the wind, I forgot the name of the association, but there's one that's just dedicated for wind turbines. Do you go there? Do you have a booth with those guys?
Yeah. So what we do is we've been going to the big renewable energy conferences. I started last winter, and then this spring I went to the big solar and wind InfoCast in Scottsdale, and we're going to hit more of them. I'm starting to get invited to speak because people see this confluence between renewables and computing, how those two worlds come together, and they're starting to figure out like, oh wow, this could be something interesting here. And so that's getting us more exposure. People are fascinated. They didn't think about like computing. You're right. That is a better battery. And so that's gotten us more exposure and getting connected to more of the renewable energy industry. And as we announce more of the partnerships that we've forged, that will bring people our way too. In Scottsdale, I sat with a group of about 10 CEOs from renewable energy companies, and it was a fascinating conversation. I got the opportunity to educate them on blockchain and Bitcoin and its relationship to energy and why energy is such a big part, and how it can help them with their issues and challenges. And they were blown away. So not only we started the conversation like, what do you say at the cocktail party? In this case, it was a specific event to invite a special guest who happened to be me, and people just got to ask me questions that they always wanted to know, like, how does this work, and why is it this, and how would you structure that with me, and I think I got a couple of bites of my steak in, but that was about it.
I mean, I think of how amazing this is that, but if it were not for crypto, then you would have had to capitalize this other side, and it'd be really difficult, right? You'd have to find somebody that wants to absorb all that compute. But here, you don't even have to ask for somebody to use the compute you're generating, right?
Exactly. That's the beauty.
You're not just putting a huge factory in the middle of some, Shanghai district or something to just, what I mean? You're like actually trying to solve this problem. While I scaled up, I'm going to use this crypto process to bring in regenerating some of the capital you've been investing into these things. That's an amazing story. I mean, I think
absolutely.
What does it look like for your, I mean, I guess you can't do forward facing statements outside of your, because you're a publicly traded company, but what does the marketplace look like Can you give us a sense of how big of a problem this is going to be? Because you're right, you can't just put batteries everywhere. There's not enough battery generation processes, right? We should be using some of this curtailment energy into something, right?
Yeah. So on the we have put out some material that sizes the space from a computing opportunity potential. We think is about $100 billion, give or take, today, and growing at a 20 to 30% rate. In terms of the power, there's 225 terawatt hours of it. Think like 80 million barrels of oil that just gets burned every year of green energy. Think of it like that. Or $7 billion of wasted or lost revenue from this problem occurs every year. So over a 10-year period, that's $70-80 billion, of lost revenue from these projects. And that number keeps increasing over time. Per year. Yeah. So every year there's about 7 billion of this globally that's just like literally burned in the air, lost.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That's by our own analysis, but it's pretty sizable, and it's getting worse, like I said, because there's more capital coming into the space. And so,
what are the alternatives? The aluminum smelting.
Yeah, batteries which aren't scalable. Transmission, which takes years to build, right? Or
transmission.
Computing. Yeah, or computing. Computing is available today. You can use that computing immediately, right? Yeah.
Of course, you do need the bandwidth connections, right? Because you got to.
Yeah. So actually, crypto is a very very low bandwidth process. Right. But phase two of our business will need more bandwidth. We're working on this concept of moving the data ahead of time, so you don't need to have the pipes be too big, because you can sort of slowly move them out there before they're needed. But as we build a bigger industry and this becomes a wider industry, that creates opportunities for the infrastructure players to start building infrastructure.
John, CEO Soluna Holdings, thank you so much. I will take care. All right. Let's do this again, because I got a whole bunch of other still more to think about on this one, but I think you guys are on an incredible trajectory. So keep in touch.
Thanks so much for taking the time, and I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Visit throughthenoise.us for more episodes and subscribe to our newsletter. This show is produced by Through the Noise Consulting, uniting external communications and internal IT functions to ensure data and privacy are protected while creating innovative communications platforms. Want to start your own podcast? We can help. Visit getthroughthenoise.com to learn more.